Hey, welcome everybody to the 25th episode of the LIBERcast, and I have the honor of having Douglas Martin. Thank you for being there, brother.
My pleasure, Fred. It's great to be here.
So tonight we're gonna talk about something that I found fascinating: um, the brotherhoods. I mean, secret societies and
Sure.
all these clubs that people can get into and have some privilege, you know, and that they have they had a lot of influence in our culture, in the architecture, in yes, so it's crazy stuff. We can talk for hours for this about this, and expand about it, but we're trying to do have a generalized conversation about this. So Douglas, how did you start, and what brought you into the occult?
Sure. Well, Nate Cap, he kept bugging me about watching Zeitgeist, and I kept, ignoring it, and he kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. So I finally sat down to watch it, and probably didn't even make it through the first time, but he was persistent, and finally managed to get through the whole thing. Certainly gave me a different perspective on what was happening in the world. So I began to consider, some alternative sources of information. Of course, ended up finding Michael Tsarian and Alex Jones, and then from there Bill Cooper, and then I got into some Santos Bonacci, and it was actually David Whitehead came on to host the Bonacci show, and he brought Mark Passio on the very last episode. And from there, I found Mark Passio's work, and of course, Mark goes deep into the occult. And I really dove in head first with Mark's work. And of course, yeah. Prior to that, if I didn't mention Alex Jones, I listened to a lot of Alex Jones. But yeah, but I went, dove head first into Passio's work, and of course that, and then I got the ARC drive. I want to recommend everybody get the ARC drive from Mark Passio. Go to whatonearthishappening.com, whatonearthishappening.com, and follow the stringent instructions, and you can get the ARC, which is now, previously was a 1 terabyte drive, now 2 terabytes. So I don't even have the new drive, but there's a lot of great information on that drive that used to be pretty available and accessible on the internet. It's very difficult to find now. So I will recommend getting, the drive ARC 2.0, because a lot of that information has been scrubbed. It's very difficult to find. Probably won't find a lot of it without using the dark web or BitTorrent search. But yeah, so going into Mark Passio's work, that'll lead you to a lot of other great authors, including Manly P. Hall. But the authors that I'm studying now, let me mention those, because to understand some of the things that I say today, you're going to really need to get into these authors. Starting with J. Norman Lockyer, Manly P. Hall, and then the other authors I recommend would be Gerald Massey. Gerald Massey is going to be a little bit of a chore, and I used Albert Churchward to help deal with the Massey, and Alvin Boyd Kuhn, another apprentice of Massey. So both he and Churchward were apprentices of Gerald Massey. But the difference being that Massey really wasn't a Freemason. So it was Churchward's knowledge of the Freemasonry that brought, further light onto Massey's work. I want to put emphasis on that. And there's a handful of other authors that you're going to that I would encourage people to look into C.W. Leadbeater. I'm reading now. He's an amazing author. He's confirming a lot of things that I've already said that I've arrived at, but I had not read his books before. So now I'm realizing that a lot of the things that I've recently said and said in the past, I'm finding a citation in his work for or supporting research. And another author I'm thinking of is Albert Mackey. So that ought to, that'll keep you busy for a while. Of course, there's others, but those authors. Oh, Harold Bailey. Let me mention Harold Bailey. That's Bayley, and that's advanced. Just like the church word is advanced. What I mean by advanced is that you have to be out of the axioms of government and man's authority. You have to be essentially initiated into the mysteries and have some idea about what the mysteries are about before you want to go into somebody like Albert Churchward or Albert Mackey or even Harold Bailey for that matter. But one of the interesting things I won't mention here is that in Churchward's work, he makes his appeal exclusively to the lodge. So he doesn't even give regard to academia. And the more we understand his work, I think we understand why. However, Harold Bailey does make his appeal to academia. And both of their concerns are very similar. Of course, it's Churchward who is deeper into the anthropology, whereas the Harold Bailey goes a little bit more into the symbolism and, mostly, from the Dark Age into the Renaissance, dealing with the Albigensian Crusade and how symbolism was and cryptic writings helped carry this knowledge into the West. And the watermarks and the inventing of the printing press, the watermarks were also used to transport esoteric symbolism into the modern world. So that's what Bailey's work is largely dealing with.
Well, their symbolism is everywhere.
That's
Actually,
right.
you don't have to go like far to see it.
Well, there's a reason for that. The symbolism that we find in Freemasonry is as old as human civilization itself. It goes clear back to the totemic sociology into the earliest hero cults. And the way that they designed the expression of this science is designed as an unfoldment. And as it unfolds, the idea is that if it becomes dogmatic, that we can find that the methods and the means that they've used to try to preserve and protect this knowledge allows it to fold neatly back into its original archetypal form, which would be equilateral triangle. And that represents the first Trinity. So everything is designed to be an unfoldment from equilateral triangle. That way, everything they're doing, this is what we have to understand, is that everything that they're doing is finding ways to express the knowledge and teach the knowledge, but most importantly, protect and preserve the knowledge. And this begins with venerating it into symbol. So first they venerate into symbol, then they venerate into the early astronomy. So when we're trying to understand ancient peoples, especially in Egypt, we have to understand these are the early astronomers. So part of their science deals with astronomy and cosmography, which is writing into the stars. And then they built the pyramids. So first they stored in symbol, then they stored in the astronomy or in the uranography, and then they built the pyramids. So the whole idea is everything they did was a contingency for knowledge being lost. And the method is designed as an unfoldment. That way it can all, if it gets lost, is the whole idea. It's that you have a contingency to recover it. But also that it's, the idea of the unfoldment is really the expression of what they see as the true creation story. So our ideas about a creation story, is some story about some monotheistic sky god, raises a magic wand, and but their idea of the creation story is about archetypes and how archetypes unfold, and then therefore the method is designed for the unfoldment to be able to be repacked back down into its most basic form. So there's a lot of things as to what makes this so perplexing for people to understand. But the reason that the world is proliferated with Freemasonry is because it's derived from what the science recognizes as inherent archetypes. And everything in Freemasonry is about form, or it's not all about form, but see, form is an expression, and understanding form is key. And it's I'm not going to be teaching how to understand form today, but I'm going to put emphasis on we really have to be able to understand that form is significant, and we start to recognize this ubiquity in our landscape, and we see everywhere we look. Once we start to learn about Freemasonry, it's almost like we can't get away from it. It's even more prevalent in Christianity. But the reason is because I'm partly stating that it is part of understanding the spiritual realm. It's part of understanding how these things are actually inherent. And that if our creation story started all over from scratch, we basically would end up with the same type of a phenomenon, because these things are essentially inherent in nature, at least to an extent that they recognized and understood. So everything that they're doing is trying to preserve them in their purest forms, as well as identify with them as inherent in nature. We're talking about archetypes like equilateral, triangle, circle, and square primarily. And this gives us our sacred geometry, which gave us our mathematics. And but part of the stigma is that as the teachings moved forward in our human story, they they're the knowledge is expanding, and eventually we go into the more complicated aspects of it, which we can call the greater mysteries. And when we go into the greater mysteries, there's more responsibility, and it is during the expansion of the greater mysteries where the whole thing becomes corrupted, and then it's basically degraded and deteriorated into detritus of what it once was. And from the ashes of that, we get our modern religions. So
Well, yes, and there's a lot of symbolism that are the same in each religions.
that
You have the cube. The
yes,
cube is every religion almost.
sure. And what these modern religions are primarily, we're talking about Judaism,
Yes,
Islam, and Christianity.
yes,
All of these have remnants of each phase of the Egyptian science, which it was once a science. So, the dilemma we have today, let me say this, is the same as we have at the beginning of classical history, which is that we do not understand the Egyptian sign language. But what we have to understand is that the earliest of the Egyptian hero cults were venerating in the stars. And by that, they are the world's earliest astronomers. But that begins in the southern circumpolar constellations, and then is moved into the northern circumpolar constellations. The problem with that is that they recognize the southern hemisphere as correspondent to the spiritual realm and night sky. So when they go primacy in the north, that's associated with, and they venerate into the north circumpolar constellations. Um, that's potentially a hazard because number one, it could cut us off from our source, but also part of the reason for this is about timekeeping. So the way the ancient peoples were keeping track of their time was storing their time, not venerating in annual cycles. They were venerating in the great year cycles and tracking it by the revolution of the circumpolar constellations starting in the south and then going into the north, where they put it all into Ursa Minor. But like I say, the problem with that is they correspond to the northern hemisphere with the physical realm. So they recognize that there's potential to go into a physical materialistic imbalance. So believe it or not, this is actually why the pyramids were built, because it's a contingency to not break from source. And they know that they're going to go into annual cycles. So before they do that, they're building these pyramids as a contingency for the sum, as a repository for the sum of their knowledge before they go into the earliest annual cycles, which were in lunar cycles. So it's still venerating in night sky in the lunar phase, but they go into annual cycles. See, the stellar priests, they feared this because they felt that it would break their chronology, and it ultimately did. So the stellar phase, which is the earliest phase, because I say that the pyramids were built 150,000 years ago, and that building of the pyramids marks the end of the stellar phase, which means that's the beginning of the lunar phase. But they're still venerating in annual cycle, or they're still venerating in night sky, but now going into annual cycles. And then the lunar phase lasts 50,000 years, and then the solar phase begins about 100,000 years ago. And then even in the earliest phases of the solar, they're still venerating in night sky. But a little ways into the solar, they start to venerate in day sky. And I've always said this is where you have a huge struggle in the priest class. But the concerns are breaking the chronology, and also, because by venerating in annual cycles, they can't keep track of these long epochs of time. So that's one of the concerns. The other concern is, as the mythology, or the mythos, what we call the mythos, evolves, they're changing types, which are, symbolic or zoo typology, to represent these ideas. And they never used human forms to represent these things until about halfway into the solar phase. They never would what's called anthropomorphize these
Yes.
naters or these deities.
Giving human qualities to.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So, and they understood the danger in it, because look at the modern world now. It's, we have these religions at odds with each other, all claiming that
Yes.
their God is only their God is the true divinity, and most of the other traditions will accept the other gods of other religions, but Christianity was very zealous, and it did campaign to obliterate anything non-Christian. So
We're talking about the shift in of the goddess traditions, and they changed this aspect of, um, because the goddess there just want to do a little, they're still representing the goddess by the way they dress, by the way, there's some qualities that are used. And then I just want to bring this, and there's a shift that happened, um, and they shift from an anima to animus, from to an anima,
mhm,
kinda, in the religion. This is a way of saying it, and it
that's
changed a lot
correct.
of things. The qualities,
Sure.
the masculine qualities, has changed everything.
Yeah, that's correct. And then in Christianity, we had the complete obliteration of the goddess.
Yes.
It was completely removed from the doctrine, and this led to the phenomenon in the 13th century. What I've talked about is the cult of Mary, and which was basically a result of Edward III when he conquered Calais. They had taken 6 of the burghers hostage, and his wife Philippa pled with him to spare their lives, and he did. He spared all but one. But see, this appeal to the wrath of the king translated, um, it created um, it created a zeal for to bring the feminine back into the Christianity, and retranslated as an appeal to the wrath of God. So this cult of Mary was the first attempt that we saw to bring the feminine back into the Christianity, where it had been, the Trinity had been stripped of the feminine principle. And of course, with this cult of Mary, we have another phenomenon of fanaticism. um it's just from one imbalance to the other, from the masculine dominant imbalance to the feminine submissive or passive imbalance.
Yes.
But there's a lot of strange phenomenons that have resulted as the result of this cult of Mary, including the Protestant Reformation and all of the other sects that came of Christianity that came out of that. So it was an interesting phenomenon. A lot of people don't really understand it or know about it, but
And
that's what it caused it. Yeah,
yeah, and I think there we can see it. You know, we can see that it's almost gone. The feminine qualities are almost gone. They have been inverted actually. You know,
oh,
and
absolutely.
like everything has been inverted. Like this is a pattern that I keep seeing, inversion of everything.
Absolutely.
And I think Freemasons and the other brotherhoods hasn't been uh, impermeabilized from this. I think that's this change
Sure.
has been like a radical shift into in the spiritual aspect, and then the intellectual aspect too. I
let me
think it's
let me try to put this into some kind of context, because see, it's the rise of the Roman Church. Okay, so we have to understand that the fall of the Roman Empire meant the rise of the Holy Roman Empire. And this means that their ambition to create world empire took on a new modus operandi, where they want to use the Latin Christendom to unite Western Europe and then ultimately expand the borders of their empire all over the world. But following the Council of Nicaea, the heresy hunting became the new sport. Anything outside of the orthodoxy was basically deemed beyond the pale, or savage, barbaric, primitive, or just it threatens their dogma. But the main thing I'm saying is that the heresy hunting became the new sport, and that so when we think of the idea of just the name secret societies puts a stigma around anything non-orthodox. So let's keep that in mind, because it's they want to control what you can learn and where you can learn what you can learn. And we have to understand that the Christian monks and priests during the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, even they were restricted to what they could learn, and they could only learn in Latin. And if you weren't in the priest class, you weren't privy to learn Latin, so you weren't even able to read any knowledge, essentially. But the idea of the secrecy is repugnant, but the need for the secrecy could be even more repugnant. So we have this zealous religious central institution known as the Roman Church trying to eradicate any learning outside of their orthodoxy. And then we have to understand that this is what gives rise to the idea of these secret societies and the need for this secrecy. Because without the functions of these secret societies, coming out of the Dark Age, the knowledge that they have carried into the modern world would be basically obliterated to the point of not being able to be recovered now. So it is only because of the secret societies that we have a chance to learn this knowledge and turn this around, whereas otherwise we won't be able to or wouldn't be able to. But we have to understand that they're endeavoring to marginalize anything non-Christian. So as soon as the secret society emerges above ground, above sub rosa, it's immediately going to be infiltrated, and then the teachings are going to be perverted and brought into the light of day to stigmatize them and then marginalize them and bolster a campaign against them to eradicate them. So we have to understand how risky it would be to have, anything unorthodox in terms of knowledge, through the Dark Age particularly, and then, up through the Renaissance. So we consider the Crusades and the Albigensian Crusade. The Albigensian Crusade was a crusade that's not well known, but it is, we do find it in history, but Pope Innocent III ran the Albigensian Crusade from 1209 to 1229, a 20-year campaign into the southwestern region of France. And basically, you had Cathars, Jews, even Christians, Gnostic Christians, and everything unorthodox, and artists and artisans gathering in this Languedoc region of southwestern France. And this Catharism had been brought into the West by the Bulgarian monks, but it stood as a threat to the central institution, which is the Roman Church. So they ran this Albigensian 20-year campaign crusade through there, and they killed Christians and Jews and Cathars and otherwise alike without discrimination. And it was said that Innocent, or one of the bishops, had said, how will we know our own? And the reply was, kill them all and God will know his own. So it was an indiscriminate slaughter, essentially.
And the Gnostic that survived it were used as tools for the new master, actually.
Right. It's very easily to bring things back under the thrall of the orthodoxy, because let's face it, people that have the ancient knowledge are a dying breed. It's always been a campaign against the learned men. That's part of what our missing history is the campaign to eradicate the learned men. And so when we're studying history, just make sure it's important to understand that you want to pay attention to where the learning is taking place. For instance, when you pick up classical history, you're in ancient Greece, and that's known as the Hellenic period of ancient Greece, which was the time of prosperity. And then after 500 BC, you have the golden age of Pericles, which is the pinnacle of the Greek civilization. And then following that, with the death of Alexander the Great, the Greek civilization goes into decline, known as the Hellenistic period. And that means the civilization is going into decline. So what that means is that the learning at that point moves from Greece and goes back to Alexandria.
Yes.
And then up to the point of the time of Augustus sacks the Alexandrian libraries in Alexandria in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. So now the learning's being brought to Rome. But we have to understand that all of this knowledge had come out of Egypt. But I said that we have the same dilemma now that we had at the beginning of the classical history, is that we don't understand, the same as the Greeks didn't understand the Egyptian sign language. So, and there actually is nescience through that period. We have to understand that this knowledge had been lost and compromised and degraded to the point where it was simply unrecoverable through that period of time. It's only been, in my view, since the beginning of the 20th century, in particular with the authors J. Norman Lockyer. Of course, Champollion's work is important, but the beginning of the 20th century, we had J. Norman Lockyer, then Gerald Massey, and Albert Churchward. And that before that, essentially, we had no real scholars that had taken the work far enough to really understand. And what it is now that makes it possible to understand that we didn't have before is what we now know about Babylon and Egypt. Because now we know that the Babylonians had taken the Egyptian neters, or the Egyptian deities, and interpret them as evil spirits or evil entities, or evil some form of evil or evil deities. And we have to understand that neters can neither be good nor evil. They're simply elemental powers. So it was this Babylonian corruption. It really happened in Egypt, but it happened before in Babylon. And then following that, it happened in Egypt. And but it's a long story. But we have to understand that basically everything in the Fertile Crescent and what we think of as Mesopotamia and Babylon, in the old world, those are all appendages of the ancient world, which was Egypt, that predated even Persia. So
we can see the Egyptian monuments everywhere in the world. In the principal London, Rome,
sure,
United States. They're everywhere.
There's more surviving earthworks and monolithic works in England, in Scotland and Ireland than anywhere else in the world. But a lot of these are mounds, and these mounds have been carved up, and then they tell you that they're fort hills. But these aren't hills that were built to make forts on. These were mounds that they carved forts into. And then, they've obliterated most of the rest of the earthworks and stoneworks, but Stonehenge is one of the few remaining. So when we look at Stonehenge, what we should see is not really what's there in front of us. We should understand that these temples were riddled throughout Europe and England. And this is one of the only ones that has survived. So when we look at Stonehenge, you really want to pay attention to what you're not seeing in Europe, particularly in the European landscape, because these have all been destroyed in this zealous campaign, and it's only the resilient cultures in the Norse culture and the Teutonic Norse and the Celtic cultures and the northern people who were more robust put up a resilience to this Latin Christendom. Had they not done so, this knowledge probably otherwise would not have survived. I'm saying it was their strong culture that created the resilience to allow this knowledge to survive, partly, but also being farther in the north, being farther from the central institution, but also more robust people in the north. And there's a lot of factors, but those are some of the important ones. So we want to pay attention to that I've described culture in 3 phases. In the first phase, it means to grow something. And then in the second phase, if the culture is deteriorating, it's going to slip into a modus operandi where it becomes a fire shield as a protection for infiltration by stealth. So if somebody comes into the culture and doesn't really know the cultural norms, they're going to stand out like a sore thumb. And in that way, the culture will act as a fire shield for infiltration by stealth. But in the third phase, the culture is reduced to basically a society policing itself, and everybody beating everybody onto the cultural track of obedience, which is what we have now.
Yes,
And see,
absolutely.
as Americans in this country, we have no real heredity. We're basically tumbleweeds because we have a vestigial European culture essentially, but so we have no roots. We're essentially tumbleweeds, and we need to understand, that in that respect, we don't have much resistance to this formidable adversary that we are facing, that knows everything about the human psychology. And
Yes, and here in Canada, it's even more prevalent. They build this country. You can see it in the churches. You can see
you're
in the
talking about the
architect.
Masons,
Yes, and the brotherhoods
right?
around. Not only them, the Knight of Columbus
Sure.
and things like that. The arches everywhere.
Right, that's Royal Arch Masonry. That's associated with the York Rite. Well, see, there is, this is the problem. Like I say, as soon as these infiltrations emerge above sub rosa, above ground, they are infiltrated, and then their teachings perverted, brought out into the light of day to stigmatize the institution and bolster a campaign against it. So we have to be able to distinguish these things. We have to be able to distinguish the institution of Freemasonry from the alumni or the members of Freemasonry. And then from that, we have to be able to distinguish the mysteries that are contained inside of Freemasonry. So all of these ancient cultures have their versions of the mysteries. And this is the ubiquity that you were talking about, the parallels. This is why we have to do the comparative study. It's why it's called comparative religion, because we have to study across the spectrum of the religions and the cultural traditions. And then where we find this ubiquity, these are the missing pieces. These are the pieces of the puzzle that we need to get on the table. And all of these cultural mysteries influence Freemasonry or are adopted into Freemasonry. And the function of these secret societies was to preserve and protect any knowledge that was otherwise deemed heretical. And, so the true Masonic student was utilizing the access to these orders to access otherwise forbidden learning. And that's what we have to understand. But see, as soon as the institution establishes, it's infiltrated, and then the teachings are corrupted and then exposed in the light of day to marginalize and bolster a campaign against it. So now these orders are acting, or can be acting as an order or a place to conduct clandestine operations in the cloak of darkness and secrecy, which further stigmatizes anything outside of the orthodoxy. So, ignorance is truly the adversary, and only in a state of ignorance can these things, or can these things be exploited in this way. And only in the ignorance would we be willing to accept this Christian dogma. We have to understand that anything that is a threat to their dogma is potentially a threat to their entire institution and their claim to the Most High.
Like I want to bring that symbolism because of symbolism is revealing who they are. They right in the front of people, and people cannot um, interpret it. So I know you have wisdom about it, but I want to talk about a symbol there that is really very important that people must know, and that's the fasciae in the middle of the symbol.
Yeah,
Can you
you're
talk? Can you talk to me to us about it a little bit?
sure. Yeah, it's a very sophisticated, complex, and ancient symbol. Like I said, This symbol of the axe is very significant, especially single-headed axe, because as I said, it all came into the North. I would tell you that the earliest secret society was double axe, and that typified Horus of the double horizon. Okay. But then as it moved into the North, that was the contingency. Single axe would typify primacy in the North. Okay. Now, in the form of this symbol, the way it's used, that's highly esoteric, what I just said. That single axe means primacy in the North. But typically, the contextual context of this symbol means the axe represents a centralization of power, and then the sticks bundled around it represent the city states or polis, Polis, under the single central authority. That's what that symbol is typically meant or typically denotes. However, in its deeper esoteric form, um, it could represent something far more nefarious when you understand this phenomenon of primacy in the North. Um, and if I think I'm going to go need to quiet my dog. My my dog's barking.
No problem.
If you just give me a minute to go see what's
No,
going
no
on here.
problem. Go on. So, if you the symbolism there, usually they're not. They're secret societies, but they're not really secret. No, they're there in the plain sight, and usually you're gonna stumble upon these people. They're gonna have symbols on them, and people don't ask questions because it looks like everyday thing. And then you have these people that are these symbols and they're on their car. It's when you talk about I am more knowledgeable about Knight of Columbus, but they're pretty much a charity kind of thing. They're helping people. They're gathering foods and helping the people around. And I had the chance to talk to one. Usually, they're very secretive and they don't reveal anything. I had conversation with some Knight of Columbus and Freemasons, and they don't really want to talk about it. And there, I stumbled upon one Knight of Columbus that I was telling him the rites and the tradition that he was practicing, and he got very angry because um, they're considering the people who are not in the Freemasons or the Knight of Columbus as profane, and they have this attitude with other people. And when you're confronting them and you're asking them the good questions, you know, they're gonna one, they're gonna tell you right in your face, or they're completely deny it. And this is one of the thing when you want to know about these things. Usually, you're going to the people that practicing it, and it's very hard to have a conversation with one of them. It's really hard to have a deeper insight into it. We have to go look on in these books that these people wrote before, like years ago, and we don't know if it's all true. And that's why I like what Douglas brought up, that it's you're not going at the same source, you're going at multiple source to get your information, and then gather it together and study the patterns and look. And like symbolism there, it's very large. You can have a star, and then this star will have different meanings depend on what tradition or religion. So yes, we have the fasci there. that represent centralization of power, and then the what all this called in English? God damn it, I forgot. The
Well, you have the anchor and the
anchor.
sword.
Yes. Can you tell us about this a little bit? I'm
Well,
not.
let me first say that the Knights of Columbus is really a Catholic order.
Yes.
Obviously, this is, they're embracing Masonic symbolism. However, I want to point out that that's practically inevitable because, see, this is key. We don't want to confuse the term Freemasonry with, what had come out of Egypt, which was ancient Egyptian science.
Hmm.
So this term Freemasonry is part of the stigma. Of course, the real stigma is, not understanding this knowledge and this science. But the idea of the anchor is to be rooted in principle or grounded in principle, and anchored to truth, anchored to, you know, the task and the purpose to carry and pass this knowledge forward. And ideally, it's about foundations too. But anchor is typically recognized as a Masonic symbol. Whereas I would tell you that the Knights of Columbus are not typically recognized as a Masonic order. However, in that symbolism, I mean, it would be hard to say that that is not Masonic symbolism because it essentially would be inevitable not to be. See, when I'm talking about double acts and then single acts, we have to understand that all religious symbolism is derived from that. So a lot of people don't know about that and don't understand that. That's another thing I wanted to say about you trying to, talk to these people. See, we have to understand that most of these orders are not functioning the way that they should. There's terms that we need to understand these terms, operative and speculative, because part of the struggle through the Dark Age is between the operative and the speculative. The operatives are using the tools in masonry to build um, structures and temples and whereas the speculatives are using these tools to build character and protect pure forms of the symbolism. So there's a struggle between the operatives and the speculatives through the Dark Age. But more importantly, it's these or I just want to mention that when you talk to some of their alumni and they are, if they're in masonry, as far as I know, they have oaths. There's certain things they wouldn't even be able to discuss with you even if they did know. But I would suggest that most of their alumni, even at the 33rd degree level, is not privy to the deeper knowledge that was lost in Egypt. So and most people are not in a hurry to reveal how much they really don't know. But one of the things I wanted to say is these institutions as public institutions, they act in today's world. They're actually functioning as an interface between the public and municipality, and that is their job, is to create cohesion between the secret orders and the public, as well as create cohesion between, I meant to say, to create cohesion between municipality and the public. So a lot of these orders are functioning in that way. And, what their true function is, as I said, was to protect and preserve knowledge that was otherwise being obliterated. But so we have to understand that a lot of people that join the lodge are looking for social strata or trying to climb the corporate ladder or social strata. A lot of people that are in masonry don't really understand the tradition that they're involved with. And I could say that about just about any tradition, including Christianity. Most Christians don't really understand what the pure forms of their traditions are.
Right.
But with the Freemasonry, it's a little bit more of a concern because they have this secrecy as part of their modus operandi, which makes it easier to stigmatize what's going on. We have to understand the need for this secrecy was this, this zealous campaign of this barbaric Roman church that committed atrocities that would make even the most primitive, savage cultures, appear, beneficent. So, or blush, I mean, some of the atrocities that these zealous Christians or this zealous Roman church have committed are the most savage atrocities that we've seen in the history of the human story. So,
Yes.
for instance, in the Third Crusade, Salah ad-Din did not murder all the Christians. Whereas in the First Crusade, they went into Jerusalem and murdered everybody, Christians, Jews, Muslims alike, and were waiting neck deep in blood when Salah ad-Din showed temperance and did not murder and slaughter all these Christians. That he took the moral high ground in doing so. But it was the Christians' own zealous, barbarism that tarnished their reputation. So that's something we have to understand. I know everybody wants to be on a witch hunt, and the fingers are pointing, and we have to understand that it's not one group; it's every group that's been infiltrated by these, dark psychologists or these dark occultists, and that you're not here to be fixed by the church. You're here to fix the church. And the church is what's going on between your ears.
Exactly.
That's the holy temple. And that's where the repairs need to be done.
That's why
So yeah,
the
go
the
ahead.
the pyramid. You were talking about this, and made me think about the chambers. Um, and the allegorical context of it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's the way you go deeper, and the you get enlightened at the end, and there was a light coming through you, and you were connected to the source. And then there's a lot of things that coming back. The Temple of Solomon, and all these there's no north, there's south, east, and west, the doors. And then you have the altar in the center, and you have the chain the I don't know if I use the correct word, but you have a chamber in the center of this, and their psychological aspect and um, spiritual path that you take and you study between them, because there's a lot of people that thinks they have like good knowledge, and they say that the Temple of Solomon was real and it has been destroyed like 3 times, and then they're trying to build it up again. And you have the people um, who like me, I believe it's an allegorical context of evolution of human consciousness.
Sure. Well, see, that's what the lost history really consists of is as I said, the Egyptian science started in the stellar phase where they venerated into the planets and stars, starting in the northern or southern circumpolar constellations, and then move that into the north. Then they go into the lunar cycles, which are annual. So before that, they venerated annual cycles only in the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which was typified by the gathering of the scarab beetles on the banks of the Nile. So they very deliberately refrained from putting their mythology into the annual cycles. And part of the reason for that is because they feared breaking the chronology, but also they understood that they would be deviating away from pure forms. And they feared the knowledge becoming compromised, and then ultimately the chronology being lost, which is exactly what happened. But everything they're doing up to that point and throughout is to create contingencies to keep it intact. But so if we're trying to fit the truth into this 6,000-year box of history that they've given us, it's never going to fit there. So this is why studying the occult is so important, because we need to take on a much broader worldview. This is what the world of the occult is about: is adopting a much wider scope of things and a much broader worldview. And part of that is the human story consists of a lot more than just 6,000 years. You need to make that at least 600,000 years. But the whole lost history is consisting of this very phenomenon that you're talking about, where we have stellar temples built on stellar hallowed ground being obliterated, and then the newer solar temples being built on top of that. And that is really what the human story consists of when we're dealing with the lost history. So the only way to really understand it is to understand the different phases of these hero cults. And then we start to understand what we're looking at when we start digging into the strata of the earth. But it's Arthur Evans's work that is really the game changer. Because see, our history wanted to ignore Mycenae and Minoan, or wanted to ignore Mycenae and the Minoan civilization in Crete. And so Arthur C. Parker, he brought forth the knowledge of what he found at King Gnosis's temple in Crete. And it's very telling, because again, you have what I would tell you is a remnant of a stellar culture, which is the oldest phase of the Egyptian, culture, and still coming basically up into the beginning of classical history. But that's what the whole history is. Rome is built on 7 hills, and those 7 hills are hallowed stellar ground. So Rome is a solar phase. There's a solar religion. Christianity is a solar doctrine. And that's what you have. You have a solar temple built on stellar hallowed ground. And that's what the phenomenon of all the lost history is about. But see, all the different cultures, like you said, this stuff had been spread out all over the world.
Yes.
And that was the reason for it, because they knew that man potentially could go into this materialistic ambition and create this spiritual imbalance, and then start endeavoring to obliterate truth. So, the first part of the human story, which is a long story, is us discovering these truths and then finding a way to express them and preserve them. That was our early science. But at some point, that becomes very inconvenient to man's ambition to dominate. And the second part of the human story is man endeavoring to obliterate anything that challenges their dogma. And, so the second part of the human story is man obliterating ancient culture. And we see that with the conquistadors and, the Americans.
We keep seeing it. It's happening in modern times.
That's right. It's happening in Ukraine now. Ukraine is the last of the stellar people in Europe. Europe was once completely populated by stellar people. And in Australia, the Australian Arunta tribes still have Freemasonic rituals in their rituals. And their hieroglyphs are clearly Egyptian, and they're not socialists. So they don't like that hanging around, because that is a real problem, for their status quo paradigm. Because, to the educated, mind, it's evident that they're building their paradigms on dogma, and they're bolstering their claims by obliterating truth. So that's a genuine concern, and this is what I would tell you that is happening throughout the anterior to dynastic Egypt. That's what's happening. Is everything is a contingency for this phenomenon that we're seeing now, because it's not that they were prophets. It's just that they understood, the nature of man's ambition, and they understood the nature of man to become corrupted, or the nature of the knowledge to become corrupted. So everything they're doing is to try to preserve these pure forms. And
Anybody who stumble upon this powerful knowledge that that englobe the occult know exactly what you mean. It is empowering to know these things.
yes, it is.
Natural law,
That's
just
right.
natural law. It's crazy. It's very empowering. And
And that
people,
is, yeah,
yes,
go ahead.
and people, like I want to always keep it, bring it back. It's the Kybalion. In the Kybalion, there's a part that um, they warn about letting this information go in the wild. That it makes, because this have the power to create cults and creeds, and this is absolutely true. In there's a lot of religions that we have now that have embedded natural law into it, and they change the name, they change the concept of it, and it's this is why we need to go the humble, and you have to go there with care, and it's the kind of care you have, the kind of desire you have as people. It creates another you. It gives you back your power. It gives you back your your mind, and your spiritual, and your spiritual aspect of yourself. Because essentially, what I use the principle of correspondence to explain natural law, because you have a natural law inside and you have natural law outside of you. And all these beautiful stories that we can see in religions, and these myths that are composed, the theological religions that we have now, there's some good knowledge there. There's some things that you can get from the scriptures, as well as the Freemasons, as well as maybe other brotherhoods that 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 share this information. Pretty much now, it's like I said before, it's not occulted anymore. You know, we have internet now. We have access to all this fascinating knowledge that is the occult.
Yeah, I agree. It's not occulted anymore. We are in the post-apocalyptic era, or we're post-apocalypse in the sense that the knowledge, which means the great revealing, the knowledge has been revealed. However, we have the same dilemma now that we had in ancient Greece, where people don't understand the ancient sign language. So the true wisdom that we're trying to get to predates language. So the language, and in particular alphabets, are the fall of the Tower of Babel and the scattering of the languages. So because the ancient wisdom predates language and alphabets, any textual, any ancient wisdom in a textual form is already potentially ambiguous, because it's the ancient knowledge never existed in textual forms. But however, the what you said in the Kabbalion, yeah, they call that they refer to basically the ignorant masses as the profane,
Yes.
and the practice of trying to teach the profane as casting pearls before swine. Now, see, if that was ever a beneficent policy or modus operandi in the past, I wouldn't say that it would be now, and I'm certainly not interested in it. I'm interested in de-occulting this knowledge
Yes.
and making it accessible and widely, visible for everybody that wants to learn it. I do see that there was a need for it possibly in the past, but there's certainly not a need for it now. But however, the Crusades, I would tell you, are alive and well, and the heresy hunting just the same. However, we're so close to the precipice. I just don't see how continuing to try to occult that really could serve us anymore. We need to get this understood. We need to get it out in the light of day. And it needs to be de-occulted, and most importantly, it needs to be understood.
The representation of the secret society have exploded into the culture. It's everywhere. It's in the on the t-shirts of the kids, you know, the sacred geometry, and the symbolism. And I stumble upon them. I was seeing kids that have t-shirt that have symbols on it just because they're cool, and they were wearing their symbolism. As I saw that as a mocking, you know. It's crazy. And like one that is very thrown out there, it's the all-seeing eye. And I got a lot of question about that, what does it represent? Isn't it the Illuminati? And I'm telling them symbolism as no has a meaning for everyone to understand, and it can be interpreted. I'm telling them the truth about this. This is the eye of Lucifer, and Lucifer was the bringer of light, and this is representing knowledge and things like that. And people are so, okay, I understand now. And I'm explaining to them that you have to see, you have to go study the symbolism, and um, interpret them, because this can be twisted a lot, and usually when you're dealing with secret societies, you can see patterns there. And what I mean by patterns is um, geometric forms, triangles, circles, squares, um, and they're changing the aspect of it and tweaking it. And then you have the symbol that we are seeing now, that is, there's the cross of the Templars in the colors that are used there. And you have this the sword. That means, I think it's the action. I could ask to Douglas about this. Usually they come as two, but depends on them. And I have a friend that he's there. He took pictures of different brotherhoods and symbolism that represent part of it. And people stumble upon these symbolism, and they don't recognize them because they're like in on the buildings. And it's like you go to the church and you can see the eye on the top of the door. You see the universal star on the top, and in the church. And you can see by the architecture who built the you it's it for the people who have the eyes to see. It's an all new world of discovering when you start to see the symbolism, the patterns, and all these things. It's incredible. And I just get into that. I mean, I'm there. I'm studying the code for years now, but there's so much to know, so much to touch. You know, I just here. Theology. It's very strong. People are abandoning the Catholic Church in Canada and Quebec, and they're going straight into New Age. But it's not different, you know. You have a different God, you have a different ritual, but it essentially it's salvationism.
Oh, I believe it. It's a stand down order.
Yes.
It's a roll.
Submission.
It's a rollover and accept tyranny order.
Yes. You're right.
Same as it ever has been. So we have to understand that these natural laws that we're talking about were discovered in ancient Egypt, anterior to even dynastic Egypt, certainly anterior to Christianity. And to understand these laws requires a deep study. It's knowledge. It's not a belief system. It's not like you just,
Right.
that's what I was trying to make the point about earlier, that the symbol had been reduced to language, and the alphabet's reduced to symbolism, to mundane phonetics or phonetic variants. And the ancients' expression was symbolism, and now that's been reduced to mundane storytelling. So it is this phenomenon of the literalization of these anthropomorphized deities that has compromised not only the science, but the expression of the science, and led to all of this dogma in the world. So this phenomenon of trying to literalize these things that are meant to be metaphorical and express, we have to put in context, trying to understand the mysteries with the context of the development of our knowledge, in general. And there's a natural order to the development of our knowledge. And it's, up to a certain point, it is intact. But then past that point, it starts to become dogmatic. And then that snowballs into what we know in the modern world as religion. But we also have to understand this term religion. It means more than just, the exoteric big three or esoteric religion. Religion really implies any type of erroneous thinking, including the belief in authority and the belief in money, or the belief in man's law, or man as the arbiter of law. And this is what the allegory so beautifully described by Mark Passio about Adam eating the apple in the Garden of Eden is not that you are forbidden to know knowledge, or the knowledge of good and evil. It's that you are forbidden to arbitrate the knowledge of good and evil. So anybody that is arbitrating law is working for the dark side. They don't serve the creator. They serve materialistic ambition. And they're showing you who they are and what they are.
Oh yes. They're very upfront about
So
it.
when you say they, it's not just the people in government. It's the people that support the people in government.
Yep.
And ignorance is the adversary. But if people are going to continue to refuse truth, we got a real problem on our hands. So,
Oh yes. Well, okay, when you have people around, that are solipsist, you're in deep crap.
oh yeah, and that's what you have. And I've been saying that this postmodernism, it goes all the way back to ancient Greece, because it's a democratic idealism. If they can get, we have to understand democracy means mob rule. That's rule by the most ignorant. If we can get the most ignorant people, that's a mob rule. That's rule
Yeah.
by the most ignorant. We have to understand why the ruling class would want that, because they are dark psychologists, and they know that ignorant people are malleable and easily put on their strings.
Yeah, collectivism.
Through mind control and
Yeah.
social engineering. So
Yes.
that's why I've been saying that this postmodernism, this idea of going with your feels, is a phenomenon that goes all the way back even to ancient Greece. So,
Yeah, well, as far as we know, it's
it goes farther back, but there we can
yeah.
spin classical history, And I just want you to understand, or I want people to understand, how it's related to this idealism of democracy, and why democracy is a deplorable ideology.
Oh yes, and
You
people don't
know,
want to hear it. I know.
well, I'm here to tell
I'm
you,
telling you, man, it's crazy.
democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yep.
It's one of the most sinister, deplorable, disgusting ideologies that you could ever come up with. And the ruling
Mhm.
class are all for it because they know they'll still be in power because it'll be ruled by the most ignorant, which means the most active among us are going to be the stupidest among us. And that's what they want because those people are easily manipulated, you know?
Yep.
And,
Yep.
so yeah,
Um, I, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. So, thank you very much
sure. My
again,
pleasure.
and I hope people that are listen to it will find it. I found it very interesting. I would do it for hours. I like this stuff. I like taking it in and
Sure.
then contemplate on it. Um, Thank you for people who supporting the Libercast, the people who came, and thank you again for participating in my great work and in the Libercast. I deeply appreciate it, and your contribution is invaluable to it. I wanted to talk about this for a long time, so thank you again. And I want um, I want to thank everyone again for supporting the Libercast, because this is so important. We need so much. We need to push this information out and make it available for everyone, because it's so important. We are so in critical time now of we have to make a choice for ourselves, and a choice as a civilization or a culture or a people, you know, and it's so important, so critical, I would say. I like this word because it's so true. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Libercast very soon. Bye.